A major highlight of this year's Melbourne International Film Festival is a documentary called Senses of Cinema. And this is pretty much a massive guide to the Sydney Filmmakers Co-op, which also morphed into the Melbourne Filmmakers Co-op and Underground Cinema in 1966 to 1986. So it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director, John Hughes, who together with Tom Zubrycki have put together this terrific documentary. John, thanks so much for talking with me.
A pleasure.
This is such an intricate and terrific overview of that turbulent period in Australian filmmaking, independent filmmaking, underground filmmaking, etc. How did it all come about?
That's a good question. It's been a very long-term project. I first approached Tom about it, I calculated the other day, in 2010. At a documentary conference in Adelaide. And for me, it flowed from a previous project called Indonesia Calling, which concerned the work of Joris Evans in radical independent film in the early post-war period in Sydney. Joris Evans made a film about supporting the maritime unions and the Indonesian independence movement after the war. I'd also done a film previously on the realist movement in Melbourne. So
yeah,
the filmmakers co-ops seem to be the kind of logical next step in a way in this attempt to kind of document a radical Australian independent cinema as a countertext, if you like, to a more mainstream view of an Australian film history, which was more interested in perhaps the highlights of an entertainment industry. So that's really how it came about. It just took a long time to get it together.
Oh, and I fully understand. I mean, it's such a rich period of filmmaking, which not perhaps too many people would realise. You must have had access to an incredible amount of footage.
Well, the communities around the co-ops in Melbourne, Sydney and in Brisbane actually were all very supportive of the project. And those catalogues, those filmmakers cinema catalogues, 4 or 5 editions over that 20-year period, made up of hundreds of startling, independent, highly authored, pieces in drama and documentary and animation. So all you can do really is gesture toward the transformation in the practice of independent cinema over that period, and use certain films as indicative of certain strands. I mean, as you say, it is a very complicated story. It ought to be the subject of a very comprehensive historical project that really does, tell the story in detail of the co-ops in those various cities and their relationship with the international movement of co-ops. But I was never able to get the Australian Research Council to make a priority of this project, just as we were never able to get, for example, Screen Australia to see it as a priority. But that's why it took a long time.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable that Screen Australia and other film bodies would not want to have this really fully researched and documented and financed, because it's as I say, it's such a rich story of Australian underground filmmaking, which people need to be aware of.
Yeah, well, you and I think it's important, but at one point, now you ask, it reminds me that there was a Screen Australia decision to not make they weren't going to be able to support it, was to say that it was a project concerning a whole lot of films and filmmakers that nobody had ever heard of, unquote. But it was possible to make the film now because the MIF Premier Fund supported the idea, and that released the project in a way. But also, I should say, before that, Film Victoria and Screen New South Wales supported development quite early on, and Film Victoria supported production as well. So it was interesting that the agencies that came on board very productively were the Victorian ones.
That is so interesting. Now you've lined up some terrific people, Philip Noyes, Albie Toms. I mean, it's endless the number of people who are interviewed, Gillian Armstrong and so on. A terrific array of people. Were they all very willing and easy to find and to talk about the underground film movement?
Yes, everyone was very positive about it. I don't think there was any cases of people that we approached who weren't happy to take it on. I mean, everyone thought it was an important project, I think. And of course, everyone will have an entirely different perspective on the degree to which it's been appropriately represented. So that's the risky dimension of, an historical project of this kind in the lives of people for whom that period was very meaningful and significant. But I hope the balances are okay. I think the problem on that level really is the absence of people. I mean, there are so many people that we really ought to have spoken to, whose account of that time ought to be recorded, who aren't in the film. So again, rather like the film, the moving image material that we draw on, it's just a strand through what might be possible in a comprehensive account of the co-ops. But did you attend the co-ops?
I did in Melbourne. Yes, I did. Some of them. Yes, definitely.
I have a feeling we might have run into one another in Spring Street.
I think you're right. Yeah, no, that was a very vibrant sort of area. I remember that Treasury Building and the State Film Theatre and the underground movement at that time, and John Flouse, of course, and so many others who were part of that.
Yes. Unfortunately, the film cites the Melbourne Co-op, but all it can do really is to say the Melbourne Co-op opened and then later it closed, with some indication of who was in, some of the people who were involved in how that happened. But the film, as you said at the beginning, is mainly concerned with the Sydney Co-op, and that's really because the Sydney Co-op survived over a long period of time. It was a more substantial operation. There were very many more people involved, and so on. But one of the sad things is that we don't have the work of the Brisbane Co-op, which only existed for a short period of time, but it was a very vibrant operation in Brisbane. It doesn't get a mention. So that's what I mean about, it's unfortunate that that nobody has yet taken on the task of doing a thorough, comprehensive account of this movement in Australian film. Maybe the film will encourage it.
Hopefully, although you've set a terrific standard with what's already in the film. So tell me, John, how did you and Tom work together in putting this documentary together?
Well, we're both producers, we're both directors, and the whole process has been very, very convivial and productive. It's been terrific for me. I've found that working with Tom has been really great. It's really enhanced the project in all sorts of ways. I think we have complementary skills, if you like, complementary sensibilities. We've been friends for a long time. We both worked in the movement of video activism in the mid-1970s, and we kind of met in a way in that context.
And it's interesting to see how the underground film movement tackled such difficult issues at the time, such as women's issues, Indigenous, LGBTQI, a whole range of topics that, of course, mainstream filmmakers didn't really want to deal with.
That's right. It was at one stage I was keen on trying to make an argument that filmmakers cooperatives were a kind of capital of those emancipatory movements, because that independent film culture was so prominent during that late 60s and early 70s period in the alternative culture, in the counterculture, if you like. And as you say, excluded from broadcasting and excluded from the mainstream cinemas. And so it was a real point of focus for those emancipatory movements. And the co-ops as organisations also articulated that emancipatory spirit, that the imperative was to work together for a mutual interest and in service of the work and distributing the work. So it, the organisations themselves were, a symptom or an expression of that refusal to conform with the oppressive mainstream at that time. And indeed, I think it gradually did have its impact on the mainstream. But in many ways, all of those things that you mentioned, the Indigenous rights movement and the sexual liberation movements and feminism are unrealised projects in a way. And just as that some of those elements in that particular independent film culture are unrealised today, that's why it's important to remember that period and that moment.
Certainly is. Fully endorse that. It's interesting that you have a really interesting music score. Dale Cornelius has provided that. I like that, the way you've handled that.
Yeah, no, Dale Cornelius did a fantastic job. I think he had some really very clever ideas to heighten the agitational moment that's present in the items that are cited. Now, I hadn't worked with Dale Cornelius before, but Tom had. So it was, I think Dale worked on A Blaze that Tom had previously made with
Yes.
Morgan and so on. And yeah, so he did a terrific job. It's a very nice soundtrack. Terrific names.
Great. Just get you to speak up a little bit more. The editing process is obviously a very complex one. You have so much material, so many interviews. What was your process in deciding what stayed in the final version of the film? John, are you there? I seem to have lost you. Okay.
I'm here.
Good, you're back. Yeah. Yes, the editing process.
We're back.
Okay, yes.
We moved into trying from a kind of collecting phase into the beginning post-production phase in 2020 at the height of the COVID lockdown. It was a situation where both Tom and I had, were locked out of the normal, and we thought, well, this is an opportunity to try and take that co-op project and push it forward. And we commissioned Uri Mizrahi, with whom I'd worked for 30 years or so, fantastic editor, to work on an initial long rough cut. So Uri and I and Tom spent several months working remotely, creating that first rough cut. Then when it was possible to move to the next phase, Uri was unfortunately tied up with other projects for a year and a half. And so Tony Stevens stepped in and did the version that, the feature version that is screening at MIF. So it went through those phases over quite a long period of time, a couple of years, but in two big slabs. But the way that we arrived at the first iteration was just to do assemblies. Tom did assemblies of some of the interview material, I did assemblies of others, and that informed Uri's initial rough cut, which really remains the basis of the structure of the work.
Okay. Very, very good. And it's great that it is screening and, of course, supported by the Melbourne International Film Festival. I gather you're hoping it will find other audiences after that?
I hope so. Yes, I hope so. We expect that the film will screen at festivals in Sydney in October, and it'll have theatrical screenings. I think it'll have event screenings. I think it's, to some extent, it is an event project. I mean, the ABC may be interested now they can see a finished fine cut. They may wish to acquire the film. And hopefully it'll find audiences internationally in that milieu of the International Film Festival movement.
It definitely should. It needs to be seen, and it shows a vibrant underground film industry that was operating, which perhaps, as I said, not too many people know about. John, great talking to you. And I just want to ask you, are you working on any other projects at the moment?
I've got the big project that I'm working on is called Twilight Time. There was a kind of a spin-off of Twilight Time that went to air on ABC TV and Compass last August, actually, called Peace Pilgrims. Twilight Time is a film that tries to remember the work of Desmond Ball, who was an Australian dedicated to an Australian foreign policy and Australian defence policy. He was one of the people who wrote the papers that made it unmistakably clear that a nuclear war couldn't be won. So Des Ball is, a figure in our history that ought to be remembered. So Twilight Time concerns all those questions. I've got to try and work out how to take that further than we were able to in the Compass film Peace Pilgrims.
Sounds very interesting. Looking forward to it. I hope it all works out. We've been speaking to John Hughes, who together with Tom Zubrycki has directed the incredible documentary about underground cinema in Sydney and to some extent Melbourne and Brisbane, Senses of Cinema, screening at the Melbourne International Film Festival. John, thanks so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Peter. A pleasure.
Thank you.